Hello, my friends. We got a good internet connection. Apologies about last night, although maybe I shouldn't claim a great internet connection right away. But I think we're going to be good. So apologies again for the aborted start yesterday. We'll get Jon on here shortly. Got a lot of good questions. Got some good follow-up questions. So we'll try to get into it pretty quick here. Let me grab Jon. How you guys doing? Thanks. Day 2. Shout out. All right, bringing Jon on shortly. Running from across the room to make it.
I was texting an MP3.
Nice. As you do. Well, let's just jump right back into it, because I know things got a little crazy with the internet yesterday, so we had to reschedule. Appreciate people coming back on. Let me say first, which I wanted to say yesterday, but we went off anyway because of the internet. But I want to say a lot of people who are starting to watch these things, listen on the podcast, whatever, we have a YouTube clips channel. I mean, there's the Live with Matt Rad Instagram as well, which has the same clips, but the YouTube clips channel, if you have a question about something, go to the YouTube clips channel and search it first. Search for 808 vocals, whatever. We may have answered your question already. I'm finding myself every week, which is totally fine. When people are asking questions, they're asking something that we've talked about. And so I usually DM people links to the YouTube clips channel. So there's the YouTube channel and the YouTube clips channel. Again, we haven't really done any promotion. This is all word of mouth. So if you guys find stuff on there you like, give us a subscribe, send it to folks. We're basically just trying to build a resource for those that are just joining it. And I was talking to folks in my session today and realized there are now 62 hours worth of these conversations on the internet, most of them with Jon, some with other friends as well. Matt Beckley, great vocal producer. We had Donut on. We've had Baines and Tizio to talk about their mixing experience. So there's a lot of information out there. So please check out the full episodes on the YouTube or on my Instagram or the Clips channel. Please search there. It's really useful. I've actually done that a couple of times where people have asked questions and then I go, I think we talked about this, and I just go on the Clips and I go 808s. It's like, oh, there's an 808s and kick conversation we talked about. So anyway, just wanted to get that out of the way. Thank you for making time again the day after, Jon. How are you doing? Are you good? You still just like you were yesterday, doing well, working hard, etc.?
Yeah. Adding a hungover, experience to the list of things. But
so you had a big night last night?
So yeah, it was a Tuesday is not usually like that, but just 2 really nice bottles of wine, which is just one too many for me. With a good friend, Rob Moose, and just it was a nice night, but I'm a little bit sluggish today. Well, but I think I have the energy for this. I think we'll be fine.
Well, this is the joy of what we do, is that I say this to people all the time. If I'm exhausted, if I'm hungover, it's the middle of the night and somebody asks me a question about music and I get excited, I'll just figure out how to figure out how to answer it. Well, One of the things that we said very briefly yesterday before the stream got choppy and whatever, we were talking about food things.
Olive oil?
And we're talking about olive oil and how much you love olive oil, how much I love olive oil. And I actually wanted to ask you again, just so it's on record here, is there a Jon Castelli cookbook coming? In what form is it? You've talked to me a little bit about it privately. You mentioned something briefly yesterday, and it's something that I, as someone who knows you well, you've cooked for me a couple of times. I know your love for making food is not dissimilar to your love for making mixes, and we all know how good your mixes are. Talk to me about food. Is it something that you're thinking about? Are you writing things down? Where are you at? Are you going to give us a Jon Castelli cookbook?
That's hilarious. The short answer is probably not, because of how much work it would entail. I did write the introduction, and I kind of have a storyline of what I would want it to be, and that's already done. I mean, obviously an editor would come in and help. But from what I've learned about the process of writing a cookbook, my concept of no recipe in a cookbook is really frowned upon. I don't know how to write down my recipes. I I could write a story about how I go about the recipe, but I don't measure anything. I don't weigh anything. And apparently, like, oh, someone would do that, and someone would come in and while you're cooking would do these measurements for you. And I just can't see myself following through with that. Now, that's to say, maybe in 5 years from now, I feel like doing that, but I have thought about it, and I did write the intro. I have a storyline. I have about 10 to 12 recipes. It's an unconventional way to go about writing a cookbook. I'd like to. I don't know. Well, Probably not. Don't get your hopes up, everybody.
I think what's going to happen is you're going to make some sort of a literary contribution to the cooking world. And maybe it's not a traditional cookbook, and maybe what the world needs is not another cookbook, but instead you talking not too dissimilar from the way that you and I talk about making records, which is, yes, there's, we'll give some tips and we'll give some specific things, but getting to the fundamentals and the why, and, why you're doing certain things, what the approach is philosophically, you and I at least think is often much more helpful than exactly how to do something, make a kick drum, or maybe make a dish. So maybe there's a philosophical, like that Sam Harris book, Lying, which is almost like a little manifesto, and then a Q&A, and then an interview. Yeah. Like there's maybe some way you can talk about food.
Well, I think the way I'd want to talk about it, and that I do, is if you can taste well, then you can cook well, right? So to me, it's about improvisation in the kitchen. And, there's people that they have 3 things left in their fridge, and on their own, they would be nothing. And then they can make the most delicious tasting thing in less than 10 minutes because of the type of seasoning they do, the type of olive oil, for that example. Like I 2 days ago made a quick, antipasto snack of olives, feta. I had some za'atar. I think that there were pickles in there. There was torshi, Persian pickles, and it was fucking delicious. But it was because my fridge was barren, right? It was hungry, so you just made something, and it tasted really. You just figure it out. Now that's the same thing when you're trying to make an elaborate meal, whether it's a protein and a vegetable, or a full-blown stew. You're improvising the entire time. Yeah. You're like, oh, I need more of this. Oh, this calls for lemon. Well, I don't have any more lemons, but I have a lime, so let's put the lime in. That's how you make new stuff. I don't know.
That's fantastic. Maybe it's train your ears and be a great record maker. Train your palate and be a great chef. Something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's all it's about. So I thought I could come up with a concept of a cookbook that it narrates how to go about. At this point, maybe try this, maybe add more of this, taste it. Does it remind you of what you ate at a restaurant or at grandma's house or something? How do you narrate that concept without, and basics hey, I'm using 4 lemons. But sometimes when I make a stew I love called gorma sabzi, sometimes I need 6 lemons because maybe I'm using more protein and it's not cutting through enough. You can't just say there's a certain amount. No recipe is verbatim to what you imagine it's going to come out to be. Or especially when you have a restaurant cookbook, or a cookbook of a restaurant that you're familiar with, that a lot of them are starting to do this, and you've had this dish so many times, and then you bring it to your kitchen, it doesn't taste the same even though you're doing it. It's because their oven's different. They're doing some je ne sais quoi in the shawarma blend, make it your own. So how to customize and use recipes as guidelines is interesting, but it's never exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, I love that, and I'm sure we will talk more about it. And if we talk too much more about food, I'm just going to get hungry and have to end the live and go eat some shawarma. So maybe we get into some...
That's the cutoff? That's all we got?
Well, by the way, it's the world record for how quickly we've gotten into food. Usually it takes us a good 40 minutes before there's a tzatziki analogy about how to make your snare drum sound good. So now we've beaten the record. So let's get into some music.
I've never
things.
wanted a snare drum to be as smooth as tzatziki. I've never wanted that.
Maybe it's a keyboard line. See, that's what I'm learning. I'm learning the metaphors.
Yeah.
Okay, we got lots of good questions. We got a couple of rounds of questions. I wonder, let's get through some kind of some sort of maybe simpler ones. Oh, a couple people have asked this. over the last few weeks, and we've never gotten to it. How do you have your EQ set on the Tesla?
Good question. I have my bass down 2 dB and my high end, whatever that one is called, down 3, I think.
Interesting. So you actually taken the EQ on the edges and pulled them down a little bit.
Yeah.
A little too high for you.
I think that's what I have. 3 down on bass, 2 on the top. And then every once in a while I go up a dB on the bass and have it at 2. And I don't know. I think I just try it to see. I don't really know why.
I know Bradley, our friend Bradley, Slowhand Sound on Instagram here, who takes the show notes. I know he will put this in the notes, of course, and we should make a note of what your settings are, which Tesla you have, and Baines and Tizio also, because I believe they both have Teslas. I'd be interested to see what the mixing community.
I think we all have different ones also.
I know. This is why it's interesting. I'd be curious to compare them to see what people's ears are and what they like, because I know a lot of folks on PMCs and things like that. What do they like for the car test?
I had it flat, and then I realized that I really wanted to listen to sicko mode in my car, and sicko mode is unlistenable with the Tesla EQ flat.
Because the bass is too much, or it's too bright?
It's mostly just because it's too bright. The vocal's crazy, and then the bass, it's just obnoxiously bassy. And then down, I went from there and I EQ'd it to that. And I was like, oh, actually, this sounds quite good for everything else. It's a little warmer. I can go louder in the car then. I'm all about warmer EQ and turning up the volume. That's how my favorite records sounded back in early 2000s. We talked about this so many times. I don't have to rehash it now. But the more you could turn it up, the better it feels. So that's the same thing in your car EQ. If it's so bright that when you turn it up, it gets harsh, just like lower the treble so you can turn it louder.
I imagine that a lot of people probably feel that way, but I think that's maybe the most fundamental way to describe how you and I have the same taste, which is we like records that can be cranked and are warm enough and not harsh enough, still bright enough, but like not harsh when they get louder and louder and louder. I think those are by far my favorite records, are records that you can really crank and feel and immerse yourself in them without them, biting on your ears. Yes. And when I don't like mixes, when I don't like the sound of records, it's because I can't crank them without hurting my ears.
Yeah. And those records, I would argue, won't stand the test of time, because you'll come back to it in 10 years and you'll be like, oh, that hurts. Like, I don't remember it sounding like that. And
they're definitely fatiguing.
Yeah, they're just fatiguing. And it's like, if you have a whole album of that kind of sound, you won't get through the album. We want people to get through albums for multiple reasons. One, as a fan, we want you to like and enjoy a body of work from an artist. And 2, for the streaming aspect, so people can make money. If you get through albums, the artist makes more money. And if you're a producer, then you make more money. And if you're a mixer and you have a point, then you make more money. So like, we should want people to stream for multiple reasons. So we should have records that don't fatigue you all the time. It's just like, it's simple. It's fucking simple.
Yeah, it's simple. Somebody asked, John asked, can we hear about, by the way, not Jon Castelli, a different John, asking him his own question. Can we hear anything about the new Leon Bridges record? Experience on that? You talked about it. You talked about it before, I think you named it. You and I talked about it offline when you were starting to work on it. You mixed a few things on that record. Can you talk at all about that experience, or anything to share from that?
Yeah, it was a cool experience. The record, to my knowledge, was done and mixed. Ricky Reed was he produced the entire thing, and he was gonna mix it as well. He wanted it to be kind of his first bigger record that I think that he mixed. Ricky's fucking great. His sounds are fantastic. But there was this one record called Why Don't You Touch Me that the A&R, who's a friend of mine, Justin Eshak, he called me. He's just like, I just think this is a Castelli mix. Like, I think we should get him on it, and kind of, I think fought for me to get a shot at this mix. And I did that, and it went so well, and Ricky just started sending me more. I think he sent me 6. I think I mixed 6, and then 5 made the album. I love that Why Don't You Touch Me record. I think that it was the right thing to get me on. I think it's definitely my, that kind of record is my forte. It's got a lot of space. It's warm, but the vocal was airy and bright. A lot of negative space. Just, I don't know, making drums knock, but also keeping it emotional and chordal. The chords, the music is heavy in there, but so are the drums. I think it was the right call. I think it was a great A&R call, and then it turned me into mixing half the record. Robert Glasper's on that record. Terrace Martin's on that record. Some of my favorite musicians are on that record.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was just really up my alley. So I got excited about it. Like someone just commented on Motorbike. Like Motorbike is a sick record. Like I haven't heard anybody make a record like that in decades. Like it's it's a driving record. Like those records just make you want to get in the car and cruise or get on the back of a motorcycle, which I wouldn't do, but maybe that's where you want to listen to it on your motorbike. I honestly, like, this is the thing I want to talk about, because apparently John Mayer likes the mixes. He tweeted that the mixes were fantastic, and that's like that to me.
He's a super nerd.
I can quit. Huh. That he tweeted about the mixes specifically, and he said something that I completely disagree with and then completely agree with at the same time. He was like, I wish I had a screenshot I can pull up right now, but I love how the top end is lopped off, leaving you with a worn-in, the feel of a worn-in sweater, that just like takes over your, warms you up, or whatever he said about a warm sweater. But I was like, the top end isn't lopped off. That's an interesting thing to say about these mixes. Like, they're warm, but Why Don't You Touch Me vocal is super bright. And to me, like, almost too bright for my taste. But I knew I was working with Ricky, and I think Ricky likes things warm but bright. So I was like trying to give him what he wanted. I think that was like, improv 4 on the mix, or we kind of went back and forth on the type of brightness. But to John Mayer, if you're listening, I don't consider that lopped off top. I think it's just not like other records where they're just blasting you in the face with upper mids and high end that is redundant. We talk a lot on this podcast about, like, not every sound needs to exist above a certain frequency range. Not every sound even produces frequencies above certain ranges. So when you just start adding air to these sounds, it just is redundant top end. I do
that way too much. I've learned from talking to you how much. I was talking about it today in my session too, this idea of making sounds great in a vacuum, where like, this acoustic guitar sounds amazing, I'm going to add a little sparkly high, a little air in it. Oh, it sounds so good now. And then when you put it in the mix, there's 4 other things with all that extra high end, and just gets in the way. Low pass filtering, and you've changed my game. Yeah.
Because you're just adding noise, and then you're adding dense noise, which then makes you have to boost top end on the things that you now are competing with, right? The things that you want top end: background vocals, lead vocals, snare drums, hi-hats, the things that, and certain synths, and you're then competing, and you think you need to boost more when you're probably supposed to reduce in other areas, right? So I don't know, maybe in context it sounds lopped off, but there's nothing lopped off. That's a funny way to put it. And it sounds, I forgot who I was talking to about it. They're like, that sounds very Gear Sluts to say, oh, the top is lopped off and it's left with a warm, whatever.
Yeah.
Spider said that. I think that's funny because, John Mayer's records aren't bright. They're warm. But I wouldn't say that the top end is lopped off. It just sounds like a proper mix. It sounds like a full range balance. Nothing is overwhelming style of mixing. And I think that's what Ricky and I were going for on Leon Bridges.
Well, it's great. It's a great sounding record, and that's such a Jon Castelli response. Of course, I love it. That's what we do here. Go deep into it.
Which part?
Probably all of it. Let's see here. There's versions of this question that get asked. Hex asks, if you don't have your outboard gear, how would you get that excitement/vibe instead? And I assume that's a conversation sort of about saturation.
Can you repeat that?
If you didn't have your outboard gear, how would you get that excitement/vibe instead? I assume meaning, how do you get some of the things you get out of your outboard gear? So good kinds of saturation, tube saturation, are there plug-in substitutes? I mean, I think we've talked about this a bit.
Yeah, this is going to be a bad answer. You would do it without it.
Yeah, so
I don't need it to do it. I just like it, and it gets me somewhere faster.
I think
you would just use your ears to get vibe and energy and excitement, and use tools according to your ears and your taste to get it where they need to be.
we've definitely talked about it in other episodes. We actually talked about it last week a bit. There's some good. By the way, I got that Toop plugin and started playing with it. The Good Hertz tape emulator, which is really nice. And obviously, we talk about Spectre. We talk about
tube and tape emulator. That's why it's unique.
Toop.
That's why it's Toop.
Hence Toop.
It's not just another tape one.
Yeah, there are actually good. I was talking to somebody else about this a couple of weeks ago who was asking about Eric Valentine mixes. I think my buddy Peter Thomas asking about Eric Valentine and sort of what makes his mixes so good. And of course, there's lots of reasons because he's just an expert at a lot of different things, and he does great. If people don't watch him, he does great breakdowns on YouTube of a lot of his big songs. But a lot of what Eric is great at is the kind of saturation stuff that we talk about, the amount of outboard gear and distorting things, tubes, tape machines, transformers, and things like Neve gear and now the undertone gear, finding ways to do the right amount of saturation. And, that's the key to a lot of things, to unlocking a lot of things that people, I think, are looking for. And of course, we've done whole hours. We did a whole hour on saturation and harmonics, and there's lots of clips about it, so people should check that out. But the short answer to Hex is there's a lot of good ways to do that in the computer now. Lots of good plugins for that. And there didn't used to be. I mean, we talked about this before, like 5-10 years ago, there were just not good tube and tape saturation, harmonic distortion stuff in the, hey, what's up? Hex just showed up. We just answered your question. You have to go back and watch now. So yeah, there's lots of good answers for that sort of stuff. Let's see. Okay, this is an interesting one that I guess is more in my world, but probably a bit in yours too. Bobby asked, how do you handle it when someone is really insistent about writing together, especially when you value the friendship? Someone's really insistent about writing together and you don't want to, especially when you value the friendship. I mean, saying no to things is a huge skill that everyone needs to learn, because no matter where you are in your career, if you're fortunate enough, there will be lots of things coming at you, and learning how to say no respectfully, politely, firmly is a really, really important thing. I think it reminds me of a conversation that I've had with a few people, which is this is a phenomenon that has happened to me, and I've been on both ends of it. This idea where you're starting out with people and you're all at kind of a certain level, and then somebody has a big hit or gets on a rocket ship career-wise, and all of a sudden you're at different levels, but you've been friends for a few years, and you two used to write, for example, used to write songs together a bunch, and then this person has a big hit, and all of a sudden they're in a ton of different rooms, and they're not writing with the same group of people, one of which was you. And vice versa, when you rocket ship past people, you have a big song, and all of your friends that you've written with for the last 2 years are like, let's get in, because of course this is a business and those things are strategically important. How to have those conversations is a really, really important thing, and it's fucking hard, and everybody messes it up, and I've done not a good job many, many times. And the truth is it happens a lot. I actually have a writer friend of mine who, when I met him, he was just starting out. Then he went on a huge rocket ship, and now we've sort of reconnected. And in those couple of years where he was off doing some other stuff, even though we had great chemistry and we're good friends, I just maintained being friends with him, because when it's time for us to make things again, we'll make things again. Yeah. But it's also because I've been through it a bunch, and I've been in this game for, 15 years. So I understand what it's like to be on both sides of those, but it's a really important thing. And there aren't a lot of good answers. You just have to learn how to say no, have a real conversation. I mean, I think the main thing, if your friends are insistent about working and you don't want to work, you just need to have an in-person conversation and say, I don't really know how to have this conversation. I feel weird, but this is what I'm thinking. I mean, it's sort of a basic how you talk to people and how you break news to people, but like ghosting people or trying to make excuses or saying, oh, I'm really busy, let's try to link next month, is just not the move. If someone's really your friend, like, you got to sit down and have a conversation and say, this is tough, I don't know how to have this conversation, but I care about you, so let's do it.
Maybe I missed this in your response, but I want to check. Is this based on someone that, like, they don't want to write with because they don't think they're talented, or they don't, like, what's the real question here. Like, that's not really the question, because your version of the answer is something, but they might just not want to write with that person.
Yeah.
They don't think that they're good, and they don't see a chemistry creatively, but they see a chemistry socially.
I mean, I think the answer applies to all of them. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you and I both have this. I'm curious for your experience on it, but I'm sure there are people that knew you when you were starting out, and now it's like, if you've got Leon Bridges and Zayn and Khalid and these people calling, you can't just like be a pal and do a solid for all of your friends all the time. I mean, this is, how you deal with those things is a really interesting challenge.
Yeah. Even down to, I have a really close, fast friend the past couple of years, my homie Alex Goose. I drink wine with Alex. I love Alex as a human, like a brother. He's a producer as well. And, you know, we didn't work together. I didn't mix his stuff for a long time. And I was very honest to him. I was like, he wanted me to mix something. And I was like, I don't know if I want to, man. I like having you as a friend. I like having a friend in music that understands what I do, understands my life, and we never work together. We can talk about what we're doing. We can talk about collaborations. We can talk about anything, and we don't have to work. And then he played me a record for an artist that was just, I understood it. I knew exactly what to do. I knew that nothing was going to come between the friendship. I wasn't going to not nail it. Because the minute you cross that, right, say you start as friends, say you've never written together, you've never produced together, you've never worked together, and then a couple of years go by, a couple of months go by, a couple of weeks go by, whatever the time frame is, and you don't nail it, there's no spark creatively, like, what's that going to do to the friendship? Then you're going to start feeling like, oh, well, one person's insisting on working with the other one. The other one's like, well, we didn't really come up with any magic. I also didn't really feel like chemistry creatively. I don't know if I want to do this, but I really love you. My girlfriend really likes you. My wife really likes you. Like, I want to come into I want to be friends. I want you to come to dinner parties. I want to go out to dinner. I want to be social with you, but I don't feel connected creatively with you, and that's okay. And then if you pick the right moment, like you're saying, you're kind of like, either you're reconnecting with people or you're deciding when to become creative with people at the right time, then you can hit a spark and then you develop a taste together. Like, most of Alex mixes is now in the first or pass or two, because he reacted to the thing I did to the first thing at the right time 2+ years after our friendship. We've talked about music. I know his tastes. I know his references. I know his interests. And that felt special to me. I've never done that before. I've just kind of been like, yeah, let's work. You know, it's so LA. It's like, yeah, let's link, guys. Let's link. Let's make something. Let's work. And it's like, no, because granted, it's a numbers game. So if early on in your career, the more you do that, the closer you'll come to finding the true collaborators that you trust and work with on the regular basis. So you can have longevity in relationships in your career. But coming into that later on with someone is trickier. So just be mindful of it.
Yeah. And somebody said in the chat, they sort of had an excuse of like, I'm not in a creative headspace or something like that. I mean, look, most people give kind of bullshit answers like that. And I have definitely given answers like that. And my management have given answers like that. I was really busy. But the reality is, if I don't want to do something, I think there's a way to say it's not for me, or I don't feel like I really want to do that right now, but maybe let's check in a few months. Because by the way, things do change and things do adjust. And so I think kicking the can down the road a little bit, I think that's the phrase, right? Kicking it down the road a little bit is not the worst thing. But I think it'd be as honest as possible about it. Because also people will respect you more if you just say, it's not for me right now. I don't really feel like I want to get in and write songs, but let's check in a few months, and I like you and I want you to be my friend, and you go from there. So I don't know. The short answer to this is, it's a hard conversation and everybody has to have them. So you might as well learn how you do it and try to be as honest as possible.
Yeah. I would just add to that it's okay to not want to collaborate with your friends.
Yeah.
And it's also okay to want to collaborate. I like
separating some of those things too. I mean, look, and you're not a songwriter as much these days really at all, but you have that ability. But like, you and I have never actually worked on anything. We definitely will at some point, but we're also not trying to force it. When it makes sense, we'll do something and it'll be amazing. And I'm sure we'll put lots of it on these streams and whatnot.
Yeah.
but it's like, we'll find the time when it's right. Our friendship was the first thing. We were nerding out about gear at your studio, and that's so much better than trying to make something happen where we have to collaborate. But also we're at not different places in our career, but we're at for lack of a better term, a higher place in our career than sort of like the hustle. Let's do everything with everybody. Let's try to make connections, that sort of thing. So when you're starting out, it is tough. Okay. Well, this is kind of an interesting question. Mac asked, what part of record making should new artists outsource or collab on versus DIY? And I have sort of, I have a kind of a broad answer on this. I think that if you are starting out as a record maker, and we've said versions of this before, if you are starting out as a record maker, you should at least try everything, which is to say you should write and produce and mix and be an artist and master, record your vocals, shoot the video, just start by learning how to do everything. Even if you're a young producer, write some songs and sing the vocals. Learn what mastering is by doing it a bunch. And then once you start doing that, and at the same time, be collaborating with people. But if you learn all of those things and understand what they do, you will be better informed in your collaborations. And then you can collaborate with the right people who take the thing that you know a little bit how to do, but they're super passionate about it. Like you may discover through writing and producing and mixing and mastering that your friend is an amazing producer and musical in a way that you aren't. So you can write some songs, hand them off to your friend, then get back things that you can tweak and finish. Or you find someone that's a young mixer, or you find some great lyricist or whatever. So my advice to that is it depends on who you are and what your skill set is, what you start outsourcing / collaborating on. But you should start out trying to learn a little bit about everything. It will inform whatever it is that you start specializing in as you get older or later in your career.
Yeah.
Any
I
other
couldn't
thoughts
agree
from
more. Yeah, to add to that, I would say the quicker you can do all and understand all and realize what you're not good at and then choose to delegate responsibilities outward, and
finding collaborators that are excited about it.
Yeah, exactly. The quicker you'll get to finish products that you're more proud of being a part of than mediocre ones that you thought you needed to do from the beginning to end.
Yeah. Do everything so that you can quickly figure out the things that you're not as good at, which usually just means you're not as excited about doing. But you should do them to learn them.
It's better to have 5 to 10% of 100 songs that do well than one song 100% that didn't do well.
Meaning collaboration is
I'm just trying to put it into a monetary value there.
Yeah, 100% of 0 is not a big number. 10% of $1 million is a lot more.
Yeah, so collaboration is key here. So. I
think generally collaboration, I'm obviously all for.
The one other thing I was gonna add to that is I don't think you need to understand mastering. That's the one thing. I would argue against, like, I don't understand mastering. I don't want to understand mastering. When I go to Dale's and he's doing 0.2 versus 0.8, decreases or adding of frequencies, or I'm like, good, you do it.
but you understand it enough to know that he's great.
I don't understand it.
But you know that he's great.
Yeah, but I don't understand it. And I don't want to understand it.
I think we're saying this. I think we're saying the same thing. There's
a magic to sending it to someone and getting something back that's better than what you sent, and not knowing how it happened, and not asking how it happened, and not being so curious on how it happened.
I disagree with that point. I think I would still want to know how it happened, and then still let him do it. But it's just going to add to my knowledge base. But I know what you mean. You don't need to go so far into everything. Just go enough to understand why somebody else is good. Fight. we so rarely disagree. People are like, oh, they disagreed on something.
I know. What should we wait? Is there a question that we are going to clearly disagree on? That sounds fun.
This is kind of a fun one. Because I don't like the question. I mean, I like the question, but I don't like the terminology. So maybe, but it's a good one. Joseph asked, can you guys talk about perfectionism and when it's good and bad? I don't like the term perfectionism. Yeah, I think perfectionism is a word that people use that don't know how to let things go. I think perfectionism is a word that people use when they talk about what mostly what people mean is perfection paralysis, which is you're scared to let the thing go out into the world because it's not perfect and you're just scared. I mean, that's really what it is. There is no such thing as perfection. Perfection is a concept that we created as an ideal to go towards. So it's great to try to make, something that Eric Valentine said, which I loved years ago. And I think we were meeting with Taking Back Sunday. And by we, I mean, he was meeting with Taking Back Sunday and I was his assistant who sat there. And he said, and I've heard him say this a few times, I'm trying to make the best record ever, every time. So that should be the goal. You should be trying to make your best work, the best work, etc.
Yeah.
But there's no such thing as perfection. So this idea of perfectionism is either everybody is that way or nobody's that way. Like everybody wants their shit to be great. You want it to be as good as possible. But the idea of, oh, it's not perfect. I'm going to take days and days and days to tweak on things that don't matter. And now I'm not sure. And look, we all get into the place where we lose our minds trying to make something amazing. But perfection paralysis is a real thing. I know very, very talented people who don't finish things because they're just scared that it's not perfect. And that's about fear. It's not about being a perfectionist. It's not a compliment. It's you're afraid. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid. We're all afraid. We're all afraid of lots of things. But you got to get over that and put things out into the world and play them for people and get it done. Somebody said Dr. Luke does not agree. I'd love to talk to Luke about it. But the reality is there is no such thing as perfection, and people got to stop calling themselves perfectionists. That's the part that bugs me is people being like, well, I'm such a perfectionist. It's like everybody wants their shit to be great. I lose my mind over stuff, but that's not an excuse.
Yeah, there's something to say about the objective person in the room, whether it's the producer, manager, A&R, someone that their job is to take a step back constantly and can just tell that the 30th iteration of the record isn't right yet, but there's inherent magic here, and it's worth pursuing in a healthy way. That's where the perfectionism doesn't really make any sense, because no one's looking for something to be perfect. It's just a language mishap there. No one's in the room. It's gonna be perfect. Like if they're saying that, they don't mean that. They're looking for it to click, to feel like the thing that's in their brain, which is so hard to do. It's like imagine being a painter and like you can visualize what you want on the canvas, but you just can't figure it out quite yet, and you're constantly painting over it and making layers, and that's what we're doing with sound. Like the bass might not be right on version 2. It might have been right on 1, and it takes 40 iterations to realize that 1 was the right thing, because that sounds excessive. But I don't want to discount really successful records that have been through that many iterations, right? Like the Billie Jean score, right, of 82 mixes and totally. So, but I like your point, which is it's not perfectionism. That's waiting for it all to click and realize and saying this is done.
That's finishing, which can be a difficult long problem, which we've talked about for 2 hours. There's 2 full episodes that people haven't watched. I don't remember which ones they were. Maybe someone in the chat. But we did 2 full hours on the idea of finishing records, which is different than people being like, I'm a perfectionist. But continue. Yes, I'm with you.
But somebody, the adult in the room, as I'd like to put it, has to be like, but this record is special. Yeah. Like this melody is worth fighting for, and the bass isn't supporting the melody yet. The production isn't at the level of this song, right? That's a common thing. That's a common thing where like the producers are just not quite at the level of maybe the songwriter that's in the room, and it's overproduced, and we're hiding the greatness that is this like raw, this raw vocal performance written by whoever, whether it's Sarah Aarons or Julia Michaels or someone that's just giving us this kind of real raw thing, and the producers in the room are just like slamming on it, and they're just like pumping bass. You're like, wait a second, hold on. Like someone's got to say, hey, can we just hear it without the bass? And you know what? That could take a week. It could take a week to get the bass right. But as long as you're taking perspective breaks and healthily moving in and out of the creative process, like I don't see that being a negative thing.
Yes,
people, people work on songs for years, and they come in and out of it. They're not only working on one song. for 365 days. That's
fully
Rossi is at play.
Yeah, I think there's many. I fully agree with you, and I just want to separate it because, of course, like, you know, the biggest record I have took a year to get right. Right. It's because we had a demo. We tried a bunch of different productions. Then we got it to an artist producer. Then he did a version. Then we got in the studio and did, like, I'm all for taking the time. What I hear a lot of times when people talk about being a perfectionist, they are people that don't. I guess I'll say it like this: if you've been in the position a number of times where you go, okay, it sounds finished. If you have an instinct for what finished is. Those people don't tend to call themselves perfectionists, because a record being finished is very different than a record being perfect. And Miggy makes a good point in the chat here. It's interesting. It's interesting how sometimes our perception of other people's work can seem perfect. And that's very true. I listen to a lot of other records and I go, that's perfect. But I know from making a lot of great records with a lot of great people, the people who are making it don't go, this is a perfect record, this is the best. Because everybody who's working on things, you're like, this is the best version of this is finished. But the idea that anything I've ever made is perfect, or anything you've ever made is perfect, and I'm sure that the records that I think are perfect, I'm confident that the people who made those are like, yeah, well, we had to compromise this, and maybe we would have done this. But that's the magic of this thing that we do, there's imperfect variables that go along with it that make things special and unique, which is, you know, art is not supposed to be perfect. Art is supposed to be emotional, authentic, effective, whatever.
I tend to feel being a finisher, and someone that has finished thousands of records, so I guess I'm allowed to say that I am one. I think there are a lot of unfinished sounding records out there right now that are coming out. And that's the word I would use. I wouldn't say that they're not perfect. I would just say they sound unfinished. They sound so dense that the focal point of the records are not, are not compelling enough. And there's too much in the way of it. I would rarely say there's not enough stuff, that it's too empty, which is very rare. I think Billie Eilish and Phineas know how to finish records. They sound like complete ideas, and a lot of them are barren. A lot of it is very stripped back production, but they all sound like, and they're known as perfectionists, right? They're self-proclaimed in the documentary that they're perfectionists, whatever. But Phineas just knows how to finish a record. He's a producer. He's probably going to be, if not already, one of the best of our time of understanding what it's like to say, this is done. And I'm sure he's labored for weeks, months, over a year on a record. But his stuff sounds finished. There are a lot of records that don't. And it's really, it's nice to hear when something just sounds like a complete, concise idea. It's not often.
And I think, again, if folks haven't watched it, we did 2 hours on the topic of finishing records, which I think are well worth your time if you're interested in the topic.
I hate doing this, but I have to pee. Can you answer the next question? I'll be right back. I
will answer the next one. It's perfect timing. Fury Drip asks, how's Matt's time in London? Did it help improve your work? How are the studios out here? I've had a great time in London. I've been here about 5 weeks, just been doing tons of sessions. Things have shifted a bit because of COVID and Delta variant and all those sorts of things. So a lot of things have been shuffled and moved. But I've been really enjoying it out here. I actually like being in an environment that I don't know very well. I've been in a few different studios. Was at another producer's studio today. I've been in a few different studios myself here, like when I'm running the session. And the process of getting adjusted to a room, and I'm not mixing here, I'm writing. So I like the idea of being in an environment that I'm unfamiliar with, because it forces me to make decisions without getting into the weeds of the sonics of, does the snare drum sound perfect? How's the vocal? I go much more on just what is right for the song. And so I think for me, doing a month of just songwriting, it's been really, really good to be in an unfamiliar place, be in different studios. There are great studios here in London. I have a few that I inhabit frequently, but there's lots of great studios in London. I would say London is probably arguably the number 2 music city in the world next to LA. And there's just a lot of traffic here. There's a lot of people here. There's a lot of great art. There's a lot of history. So yeah, I've had a great time here. I answered a me question while you were in the bathroom, John.
That's perfect.
Let's see. We got about 10 minutes left. Okay, we did that. We haven't had this conversation in a while, so maybe it's just the same as we've had it before, but it's worth always checking in on. Walt asks, tips for mixes translating to Spotify and not sounding quieter than other big songs. I mean, other than our discussions about density and loudness. Again, we did full hour, maybe 2 episodes on loudness. So loudness is a really important concept. So please go watch those. We get really, really deep into it. But in terms of has anything changed in the last 6 months in the streaming services? As we've talked about before, each streaming service has a slightly different algorithm for how they adjust and convert. I know that there are some doing more lossless versions than others, but I don't think lossless is nearly as important as loudness in terms of the question. And I think each of the streaming services has different normalization settings. Some of them are default on there, some of them are not. And the truth is, there isn't really a great answer. I think what a lot of us have concluded about how loud do you get your shit for the streaming services is you got to kind of strike a balance between the best sounding thing that's at about 12, 11 or minus 11 or minus 12, somewhere around there, between there and then the loudest stuff, which I always reference, like Purple Lamborghini, that Rick Ross Skrillex record is like -3, some absurdly loud thing. So you have to find the balance of what sounds best for your record in between there. And the closer you get to that -3, if normalization is off on people who are random, just any listener of a streaming service, your shit's going to sound louder. But if normalization is on, which I believe is the default for Spotify, then your shit is going to sound like it has no transients and it's going to sound squashed because it's going to get moved down to -12, -14, whatever the various streaming services are. So there isn't really a great answer right now, I think, unless things have updated from your end. Do you know anything about that? Any thoughts?
No.
It's frustrating.
It's frustrating. I don't know. I'll check mixes on Tidal and I'll go to Spotify and they just sound completely different. And it's a bummer for everybody. What I've noticed is, and I mix with a lot of low end, but I don't mix with a lot of compressed low end, that the more dense and compressed your low end is, and it's loud, like 808 music that has way too much low end, and compressed, not that's the distinction. Spotify, I think, turns that down more. I'm not going to be the best at answering this because I've noticed that low end heavy compressed sounding records, that density in the low end, Spotify must be reading that more impressively than the high mids or highs or mid range and coming down, right? So if your record is darker and has a ton of low end that's just super dense down there, it's not going to sound as perceived or be perceived to be as loud as other records based on how much density is down there. So I would try to control your low end, make it big and true, but not too much of it, and have enough high mid presence where it's not harsh to the ear. So you can do what Matt and I like to do, which is turn up records. But so we just turn up, and I don't want to say I struggle in that area. My intuitions are to mix warmer in the high mids. So I am coming up with ways to, with my taste, give enough high mids, whether that's with saturation boost broadly after the fact, after doing some surgery up there. That's a little bit of insight into what I'm trying to do to combat that, because I like low end. And yeah, you can sacrifice low end and then, and it will sound great on an iPhone maybe, but then the minute it goes to a club or a car or something that's going to be lacking there, and I want it to be full range listening all the time. So this is something I care about a lot, to be honest. I don't have an answer because I like your, find references that you like and learn where they sit. I don't pay attention to loudness when I'm mixing anymore.
Yeah.
I have a meter and it's there. I mean, I'm rarely over a -8, but if it happens to go around there. It's just like, how does it feel? Is it supposed to be more dense and compressed feeling and up against the glass, or is it supposed to be an R&B record and be a little looser and have more space between the groove? Like, it's all about groove to me. So whatever enhances that. And I just don't want to lose groove on Spotify, and sometimes you do if you have too much low end.
Well, I would say one other thing, and I'll speak to the audience and speak to.
I don't know. I would love to edit that part out. I don't really know.
You don't really know, but that's an important thing. Is that we don't really know, and it's frustrating for all of us who are making records. I'm sure people listening as well. But I want to just say something about what you said, which is, and to sort of talk to the people, as it were. Jon has got the density of his mixes and his ability to EQ and get the arrangement correctly, and he gets density right. And from there, it's a much more nuanced conversation about how much, high mids and where do you want the density to sit. I think almost everybody watching this stuff, you can get your mixes louder if you just get the balance and EQ and density right. If you actually put the parts in the right places and don't have competing frequencies and don't have competing high end, and so therefore you don't have to make, like we were talking about earlier in the stream, so you don't have to make your vocals nearly as bright, and they can actually not push the meters as much because they're clearer, and the perceived loudness is louder than what the meter is saying. And that's ultimately what you want to be able to control in a mix. When people are talking about loudness, what you're actually talking about is perceived loudness and density of a mix, where everything fits, how you're saturating, how you're compressing, where the parts are. I think that will do more for people's loudness than, how loud should I limit this thing? I think the vast majority of people, including myself, from doing these streams, learning about filtering, high pass filtering to make room for the kick drum and the 808 in a certain spot, low pass filtering to get the right amount of high end in the right spot. The clarity and perceived loudness of your mixes is the biggest place that people can improve while we figure out and how to hit the moving target of streaming services and their sort of ever changing algorithms. Since you can't really control that, it's just best to learn how to mix better, I guess is what I'm saying. But I think loudness and density and perceived loudness is a much better place to explore than worrying about if your mix to the streaming service is -7 or -10. I don't think that matters nearly as much as people think it does.
Yeah.
5 minutes left. Let's see. Hex asked, let's see if there's a bunch of questions in the, I already answered one from Hex. So let me see. This is interesting. Do you guys have notebooks of information about music production, of tips you picked up over the years? It's a really good question. And the answer is no, because oftentimes there's certainly, I'm trying to think if there's any physical record of any of my knowledge.
Yeah,
and I think the answer is no.
It's right here. It's right here.
Well, it's here. I'm spitting it out. Certainly, there are settings and sounds from previous songs, or if I get a chain right, I save a chain, and so I'm accumulating knowledge and iterating on it that way. Or like if I get a great drum sound, I'll save a snare drum sample and a kick drum sample from that song, put it into a folder. But by and large, there's no documentation for any of this stuff because we're just doing it and applying it and continually moving forward. I think there's nothing wrong with studying, and if there's some mechanism for people to actually keep records of things, that's great. I've basically never done it. I worked on, when I did the Dredge album years ago, we had a guy at the studio whose name I cannot remember, at the plant in Sausalito. We were the last session at the record plant in Sausalito where they did Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, and all these. We were the last session where it was still working as a studio, although I think they've maybe rebuilt it now. But anyway, there was a guy who took meticulous notes of all of the drum miking and all of the EQ settings and where the Neve preamps were and all that. And I think I never looked at them once. I think I have the notebook somewhere. They're in a closet, but I never have kept track of any of that stuff. I think it was more for like recall, like if we wanted to come back to it or something. Yeah. But yeah. I appreciate it. I must have 20 pages of notes just on these lives. We have show notes also. LiveWithMattRad.com, Bradley, we talked about earlier, has kept notes for every one of these episodes. So if you go to LiveWithMattRad.com, click on episodes, there's notes with links for every episode, with links to plugins and artists and whatever else. So please check that out. I think that's probably about good. You want to call it here? Anything else?
Yeah, I want to briefly just
people?
answer this. Besides Tony, who's a mixer that you study, I don't really study mixers. I study songs.
And sounds. Songs and sounds.
Songs and sounds. I'm not really stoked on mixes right now. We've talked about this. I'm not trying to be a hater. A lot of people are doing really good work. I don't hear people doing profound work sonically right now. I wish that was not the case.
I think my favorite mixers / mixes contemporary, when I hear new stuff that's interesting, tends to be self-contained EDM people who are doing something like Skrillex, like Sonny, some of Sonny's best stuff. But is it mixing? Is it sound design? But he's also the artist.
Yeah.
It's, the idea of mixing as mixing is obviously still a profession and still important. But even we've talked about it. You're more of like a sound designer finisher than you are a guy who gets raw tracks on a tape machine, pulls up faders and figures out what it's supposed to sound like. Like the profession has changed a bit. So, I mix everybody I think is mixing things as they go, but then they hand it off to another mixer or someone like Skrillex or Calvin Harris or some of these people that are really self-contained. I think those people are the most interesting to me because they're sort of doing a new thing, a new combination of things. And I like that. I mean, I'd say that's kind of my favorite shit.
Let's hit these real-time questions before we... Okay. Do you ever feel jaded to just music in general after working on so much? No, I would never use the word jaded. Sometimes I'm not loving what I'm working on for hours at a time, but I love working on music, and I feel a lot of extreme gratitude that I get to do this for a living most of the time. I would like to be consistently working on higher level records, if I'm being honest. But I can always find something I love about most records that I touch, and I'll take breaks. Like I didn't really work that much yesterday. I did some mix notes. I'm going to do more mix notes today. And if I'm not feeling it, I'm not going to put that energy into someone's record. So I'm learning to not overwork when I don't need to. And when I need to, obviously, go all night, do whatever it takes. But no, I don't really get jaded from it. Do you?
Let me go real quick on it. I've certainly had moments where I think I've told this story before. I was engineering a record years ago and doing, 10 or 11 hours a day of heavy guitar for weeks and weeks. And what ended up happening is that I could not listen to music outside of it because I was so fatigued. And all I was doing was listening to the same distorted guitar sound over and over and over and over. And I stopped being a fan of music because I was just exhausted. So it does happen. It does happen where you get kind of tired of it and you can't go just be a listener. That's my version of it. But like you said, the solution to that is breaks. We talk about breaks in the micro. We talk about breaks in the macro, whether it's get away for 5 minutes and do a push-up or walk outside and then come back to the mix, or take a couple of days off and go, literally smell the flowers somewhere. Breaks are really important. I think the idea of you're so into music that, I'm sure people say this to you, people say this to me, like, oh, you probably listen to music and here you're listening to all kinds of crazy things. And the answer is I can, but I've also learned how to turn that off. Like, I love listening to some shit and just like, this shit is fire. And just fucking.
Oh my God, imagining to listening to the new Tyler, the Creator album, like analyzing it. Like, why?
Which I've also done, and it's insane.
What a waste of time! What a waste. Well, you're gonna make it better. I'm gonna make that album better.
Well, there's different. I think it's a different thing we're talking about, which is you can. I love listening to contemporary music, like listening to the Tyler album and going, "Whoa, what a cool change! That 808 is crazy. That distortion is wild. I love that."
That's different.
Oh, well, yeah. But so I think. Can you turn that off? And the answer is, of course. You just practice it. You just
the best
go listen
music
to things
makes us turn that off.
Yeah,
I think I think
That's
the purpose. I think my point on this is that specifically, which is there's so much music coming out that I'm pretty sure I can improve, and I don't get a chance to. And it makes it very hard to listen to. When a record comes out that I don't want to touch, to me that's a great record.
Yeah. I like that. And somebody asked a question here, which I wanted to grab, which I really liked. Yeah, Spider said here, stay curious in general. that's a really good answer to the question Ryan earlier up on the chat here says, how does one expand their music discography to study music? It's really weird right now because Spotify and some of these other things are actually not great music discovery places. They tend to, like so many algorithms, show you what you already like, related artists, that sort of thing. It doesn't really expand your palette. I mean, I guess you could listen to like New Music Friday, but that's all new stuff. You can't really, there aren't really good ways to discover things that aren't already in your algorithmic wheelhouse. And I think the answer is kind of what Spider said, which is stay curious. And you got to make an extra effort these days. You got to seek it out. When John talks about, 60s Iranian psych music or whatever, like, go Google that shit. Like, go find it.
Go find it.
You really have to make if you want to expand your vocabulary musically, your taste, you got to just expand that shit. You got to seek it out yourself. I mean, and honestly, find some friends who think differently than you, that have different life experiences, whether it's on the internet or in person, especially in person, but obviously it's a weird time right now. But like, try to find people that aren't like you. They have interesting cultural tastes, interesting music, interesting art, interesting fashion. And that's why that's why I just up and leave and go to London. If my passport wasn't expiring soon, I would have gone over to Paris. There's also some restrictions, but like, I'm trying to travel and go meet new people and hear new music and go to new places. I mean, you got to make an effort to do that, but it's super, super important. If it's something you want to do, it's very valuable.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good hour. Thank you guys as always. Till next week. John, love you. I'm going to jump on the Discord after, and thank you guys.
Cheers.
Peace.